Hey guys, this video is designed to assist you in writing your analysis. So being able to structure a clear and logical analysis of your persuasive text is really important. It's part of your rubric that you will be assessed on. So I'm going to run you through how I expect you to do this. There are a few different ways of doing it, but I will let you know sort of the main or the most popular ways that people write analysis, and then you can decide for yourself which one suits you best. So firstly, I just want to clarify for you that you do not need to use Peel. In fact, you're not going to use Peel, but your ideas must be sequenced logically. So Peel is for essay writing, analysing a text, creating a persuasive essay, then you would use Peel, but you are not using Peel for an analysis. An analysis is a different form of writing. Of course, it requires you to be structured in your ideas, but you do not need to use Peel. The second point I want to make is that you need to make sure that you've practiced analysis before you go into your SAC. This is not a task that you can go in and just wing it. It's quite difficult to do that. It's important that you have a go at writing first, and that you allow yourself the opportunity to refine your work. So writing an analysis for a persuasive text as a practice, I would actually recommend doing that a few times, not just once, so that you gain an understanding of how you can actually make your work better. So just wanted to highlight, I expect you to practice analysis before the SAC. And then lastly, I just want to say that what I'm going to tell you in this video are guidelines. It's not hard and fast rules. It's definitely, there is some flexibility in how to write an analysis. The important thing is that it is clearly and logically structured. So if you have a different way of writing an analysis, and you'd like to use that, that's absolutely fine. But I really encourage you, in fact, I require you to seek advice and feedback so that I can make sure that you're writing it in a way that is clear and logical. So we're going to start off with how to write an introduction or opening paragraph for your analysis. There's a very particular way that I would like you to go about this, and I recommend you to take notes. If you haven't got a notebook in front of you, maybe it might be a good idea to pause and get that now and then come back. So there's a couple of key elements I'd like you to include in your introduction. The first is you must introduce the issue, and you must give context for the persuasive text that you'll be analysing. The second, you must introduce the persuasive text, so the name of the writer, the title, the date of publication, the form. I'd also say, to put in the audience as well. So the intended audience of the persuasive text should be stated in your introduction. You must state the writer's contention in your introduction, and you must include a comment on tone. So I've actually given you an example of an introduction that I've written for the article that I posted on Schoology for you. If you haven't read that yet, please pause this video, go and read it and come back. So I'm going to just quickly show you that I've highlighted the different key elements that I've put together in my introduction. And just remember, like I said before, it's not like an essay, whereas in an essay introduction, you have your contention and then you summarize your main points. This is not like that. There is a lot of flexibility in how to write your introduction. You just need to make sure you include the key elements that I've highlighted. So in that very first sentence in my introduction, I've put the form, which is an article, a newspaper article. I've put the details of the publication, so the name of the writer, the title, the date, all of that. And I've put the issue in that one first sentence. So try to be as succinct as possible. You must include all the information, but that doesn't mean that you have to go on and on and on, writing sentences and sentences just to get this information in there. One sentence, and I've included 3 key elements already. I mention tone, and then I talk about the audience. I then move on to contention. So in that dark green, the author's contention is that people in society need to be more considerate in regards to others. And then after that, I've given context for the persuasive text. So I've said, this is a reaction to the frustrations she's experienced in the lead up to Christmas. The reason why I know this, as you can see in the first sentence, this particular piece was written on December 19th, 2014. So obviously she wrote this 6 days before Christmas. She mentions Christmas at the beginning of her article. I can conclude that she has written this as a response to frustrations she's been experiencing recently. So it's interesting Trying to find context for an article can be hard. Sometimes it can be easy, but you do need to read between the lines a little bit. And of course, you need to be informed about current issues. Just remember that any article that you're given to analyse in a SAC or an exam in VCE, there are actually requirements for those. They must be published within the last, I think, 18 months. So you wouldn't get this article because this was written in 2014. But yeah, it must be published within the last 2 years, 18 months, 2 years. So it must be current. The idea behind that being, if you are smart and you get on current news and events and you're updating your knowledge of current news and events often, then you're not going to be blindsided by any articles. You will know about all the current issues that are happening in the world. So whatever article you get in a SAC or an exam, you will probably know about. You may have even read that article already. So it's important that you do the groundwork for analysis of argument in VCE. It's not difficult to get into that routine, but once you do, it really is beneficial. Anyway, I've finished my introduction talking about tone. So I provide a little bit more information in there. As you can see, though, the introduction is not super long. It's just very succinct. I have everything that I needed to include in one opening paragraph. I hope this is helpful for you. Feel free to pause on this page and have a look and make notes if you need to. So next up, we've got our body paragraphs. Now, there are two different ways that you can go about writing your body paragraphs, or the bulk of your analysis. There's actually a few different ways, but I'm going to show you two. I don't want to overwhelm you, and I think these two are probably the most common ways that people go about writing analysis. So body paragraphs should always show an awareness of how argument and language technique work together. This can be done in a couple of different ways. The first I'm going to tell you about is paragraph by paragraph. So this is really the most straightforward approach that you can have to an analysis. It involves analysing each paragraph of the text in order, showing an awareness of the way in which the author builds an argument throughout their persuasive text. And also the way in which persuasive language techniques create effects on the reader as the piece progresses. So essentially, you're going through the article and analysing sequentially. So in sequence, your analysis will read through the article as the article plays out. So you might have some sentences in your analysis such as the writer opens with blah, blah, blah. In the second paragraph, the writer clearly states blah, 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 and then the writer's aggressive tone becomes more pronounced in the third paragraph, blah, blah, blah. So you can see this is more based on your following the structure of the article, which determines the way your analysis is structured. This is good because it means that you're very unlikely to miss any pieces of information in that article because you're going bit by bit. You should be able to read everything and clearly identify the different arguments that are being stated in the article. One way this analysis structure doesn't work is if a writer has used the same argument a couple of times in their article or their persuasive text. So maybe in their first paragraph, they have a particular argument that supports their contention, and then they revisit that argument later. Sometimes students can repeat themselves too much. So you have to be cautious of that. The next technique I want to talk to you about is grouping techniques for structure. So you might structure your analysis around persuasive language techniques. So for example, your first body paragraph in your analysis might focus on the author's use of personal anecdotes to justify their arguments. Your second paragraph might focus on her use of colloquial or slang language to create a familiar connection with the reader, which is supported by the use of inclusive language. The purpose of this technique or this structure is to aim to show how techniques work together and have a cumulative impact on the reader. So working together, arguments and techniques, what impact does that have on the reader? Now, I actually prefer this particular analysis structure, not because I think it's better, but I prefer it personally. I find it easier to write because I can read through an article and it's clearer to me to be able to identify the key persuasive techniques that are being used in a text. And then utilize examples from throughout the text rather than going through sequentially. So going through the article from top to bottom, I can pull out the key persuasive language techniques that are being used, and I can identify different examples of that. So I like this structure because you're very unlikely to not pick out persuasive language techniques. Sometimes if you're doing the paragraph by paragraph structure, some students can forget that their purpose is to analyze language techniques, and they can focus more on almost summarizing the article, which is definitely something that you want to avoid. Whereas if you're using the grouping technique and you're basing the paragraphs in your analysis around techniques rather than around sort of a sequential structure in the article or persuasive text that you're analyzing, then you're very unlikely to miss out on any of that analysis. So I quite like this particular structure. So you might use some sentences such as, the writer relies heavily on generalizations to present their argument, appealing to the reader's sense of justice. The writer offers a series of anecdotes. That could be another way that you say it. And lastly, we've got our conclusion. So how do we finish our article? How do we finish our analysis? So lastly, we've got our conclusion. There's a couple of key elements, just like an introduction. So you would start with the writer's concluding persuasive technique and its intended effect on the reader. So this is always extremely important. It's the last technique that the writer has used. What do they want their reader to walk away with? What's that idea? It's important that you don't waste words going over persuasive techniques that you've already analysed. I want you to focus instead on the overall approach of the writer and the way in which they've tried to persuade their audience. You must link back to the contention and the overall argument that is used by the writer to express their contention. So you can see, obviously, I've done the same thing. I've written a conclusion on the side here, and the highlighting will correlate with the key elements that you should be including. So the author ends article with an emotive call to action. So this is the concluding persuasive technique that the author uses, and I've described the intended effect. So the intended effect, it attempts to shock the reader into showing more consideration for others. I've then gone on to focus more on the overall approach of the writer and the way in which they've tried to persuade their audience. That's the majority of my conclusion there. And then, of course, I've finished my analysis with a link back to the contention and back to the overall argument. So the final sentence reiterates the author's main contention. By condensing it into one issue, she wants people to show consideration in all areas of day-to-day life, but she's maintained her example of people walking too slowly to the very end of the article. So that would be how I would finish my analysis. And as you can see, it's pretty concise. I don't have much else in my conclusion. So I'm just going to go through very quickly a few things to avoid in analysis, things that I think are really, really important ideas to keep in your mind. So the first two are ones that happen almost every single time this SAC is run. Every time I've experienced it, someone will always give me their opinion on the issue, or they will give me their opinion on whether or not they think the article was persuasive. This is something you must avoid. So you are in the position of analyzing the persuasive language techniques, the arguments, and the structure of the article. You're not analyzing whether or not the issue is important or whether or not the writer of the article or persuasive text is correct. That is not your job, and you will lose marks if you do that. So please try your best. And again, this is why practicing is so important, because it's really easy to fall into this trap. Do your best to make sure that you're not giving me your opinion. Do not summarize the article. So again, if you're doing the paragraph by paragraph analysis, it is a trap some people can fall into to summarize an article. If you're not sure about persuasive language techniques, you might fall into this pattern of just telling me what the article's saying rather than actually analyzing argument, structure, or language. So be really careful about that. And also, just with conclusion, try your best not to summarize the persuasive language techniques that you've already written about. A lot of students, if they're not sure how to write a conclusion, they freak out, and so they just tell me what they've already done. So they go over the ideas they've already expressed, which just doesn't add anything to your analysis. You're probably better off saying less rather than more. So yeah, make sure you're not summarizing in your article, you're only analyzing. And lastly, don't identify persuasive techniques without telling me why the author has used it and what impact it is intended to have on the audience. I expect Year 7 and 8 students to be able to tell me what a rhetorical question is and when it's being used. I expect you to be able to tell me what impact it's designed to have on the reader in the context of the article you're reading. So good luck. I hope this is helpful. I know it's a long video, but yeah, I'm looking forward to reading your analyses.